Hello, this is Erik Gustafson with Iraq Matters. I'm excited to, we're doing this special podcast for Veterans Day, and I'm thrilled to introduce our guests. We have 3 Iraq War veterans who are joining our program today. So I'd like to have them introduce themselves. We'll just do a round robin. Go ahead, David.
Hello, my name's David. I was a former summer intern at EPIC. Currently, I am an undergrad student at UC Davis. Right now, I'm actually in the 24-hour study room. You can see a bunch of students being studious and studying for their midterms and or working on papers. I was in Iraq twice, once in 2008 in Anbar. I was in the Army, but attached to the Marines, and for most of that tour, I was doing missions in Fallujah and a few in Karma, which is east of Fallujah, or locally known as Garma. It has both of those names, Karma or Garma. The second tour was in Basra in 2011, and I was there up until the withdrawal.
Christopher?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm actually currently in EPIC's office. I'm an intern for the fall, completing a graduate certificate for James Madison in international NGO, international nonprofit management. I was in the Army and I served in Iraq in 2004-2005, and I was there for the surge in 2007, with both of my tours being in the city of Ramadi.
And Lynn?
Hi, my name is LYNNE SCHNEIDER, and I served in Iraq 3 tours. The first 2 tours were outside of Baghdad in 2004, 5, and 7. I had a civil affairs team the first tour. Second tour was a strategy planner for the non-kinetic side of the surge, and I served both those tours with the same individuals, actually, which was quite interesting. And then the third tour, I served as a DoD senior civilian in Basra. I was the economic advisor to the commanding general in 2010.
So I'm going to run through 3 questions for all of you. The first question, starting with David, is what do you remember most about your time in Iraq?
There are a few things that I remember, but the 2 things that stand out are the camaraderie that I have with those whom I'm deployed with. It's something hard to explain. Deploying and coming home with a bunch of guys, you hear it in the movies all the time. They say things like, we're closer than brothers, but it actually is. But more so relating to Iraq and not towards us, just the human spirit in general. Iraqis, they've gone through, ever since Saddam invaded Iran in 1980, they've gone through pretty much 30 years of continuous war, yet they're still able to continue to live on their life, go to work, go to school, and try to be normal human beings.
Christopher?
Just to build off of what David said, as far as the Iraqis and their humanity, they're extremely there's their humility. After serving in Iraq for about 3 months, we were moved to Ramadi, and we had about a month and a half to 2 months of just heavy fighting. And eventually, after the fighting kind of died down, we would go into basically some houses and on a patrol or whatnot, and they would just offer us like fistfuls of bread, rice, chai, and it just seemed like they kind of appreciated what we were doing.
And Lynn?
Yeah, I remember, I have to agree with David also with the military camaraderie. You make friends for life. There's something about being in a war zone together that not only bonds people together, but I think changes you for the rest of your life. And the second thing that I would like to mention is what I remember, and it still exists today actually, is the extreme poverty and the lack of infrastructure among the local Iraqi populations. But nonetheless, there is an enormous amount of kindness, and the people really have an enormous amount of courage. And so those are the things that really stand out.
Definitely, I'm hearing themes about, you'll go to many areas of Iraq where the hospitality is almost legendary. So the next question I have for all of you you have to kind of think back to the time before you deployed to Iraq. How did your perceptions of Iraq and the U.S. mission in Iraq change with your experience on the ground there?
My perception before I got to Iraq that it was just one giant war zone, similar to every day would be a day like D-Day in World War II. When we flew from Kuwait to Al-Assad Air Base, which is in western Anbar, and I thought right when we landed on the C-130 that we were going to get mortared, we're going to get shot at. So I remember getting off the C-130 and I'm like ducking my head, getting like, okay, where's it going to come from? When in reality the only thing I was dodging was the hot air from the C-130 because nothing was coming down. So that was my first perception, is that it was literally just going to be violent every single day. And then once I started doing missions, I thought that, for instance, like I said, I went to Fallujah, which was previously the worst area, and Karma too, because Karma was kind of an area in between Fallujah and Baghdad that was like a resting zone. Those two areas, along with Ramadi and a handful of others, were among the worst fighting ever since Vietnam. So I thought in Fallujah everyone was going to hate us, but that wasn't the case. Similar to what Chris said about the hospitality, I vividly remember one foot patrol we were doing. A little Iraqi boy comes out of his house with a bowl full of dates that they probably grew in their house, because the way that it works is like there's like 2 or 3 story houses, and they would have walls that were about 5 feet high with little gates. So the little Iraqi boy comes running out his gate with a bowl of dates for us, and he gave it to all of us as we walked by. So I perceived that things were a lot worse than they were, and that they all hated us, when in reality they didn't. There was a lot who liked us, there were a lot who wanted us there, but granted there were a lot who didn't want us there. Sometimes on my first tour in Fallujah, there would be instances where like the air just seemed thick with anger, and same with in Basra. When I did certain missions in Basra, if it was in a neighborhood that was basically owned by a militia, you can just sense their absolute hatred towards you. But that was, in my experience, that was the minority of the time, not the majority of the time.
And Christopher, what about your time in Iraq?
I would say my experience was a little bit different from David's. I was actually an 11 Bravo, or infantryman, so I was basically trained to fight. And when we got the orders that we were going to Iraq, we looked at it as, hey, we get to do our job. And everybody, quoted their favorite line from Black Hawk Down and all that crazy stuff. And it was just like, this is going to be awesome because we get to do our job. And I had the misfortune of being one of the first people to actually lose a best friend. We were conducting a mission around Fallujah, and that was actually part of our AO at one point, was just doing missions around Fallujah to kind of get rid of the surplus of arms. Well, he ended up getting shot and killed, and he was the first casualty for my battalion. And kind of right there, I just kind of had a huge reality check that death can really come forever, and this isn't something that you should be enthralled about or enthusiastic about. It should be something that you should really kind of think about and say, if I make a mistake, somebody's going to get killed. And by the end of my first tour, I was pretty much, I hate Iraqis. Iraqis are just these horrible people. They just don't want us there. They just want to kill us. And my opinion changed a great deal when I was basically put onto a military transition team, which basically serves to advise the Iraqi army on how to do things better, how to just conduct missions and convoys and just your basic everyday kind of infantry stuff.
This was your second tour in Iraq, is that right?
Yes, this was 2007. Okay. And I was actually placed on a mid-team with a bunch of Marines. So late in my tour, I was actually put on a detail to set up a forward operating base with basically 50-something Iraqi soldiers and only one other American for maybe the first 2 weeks. And kind of the ironic thing about Iraqis, they think about things a little bit different than us. We think about force protection when we start, moving to a new area. We're thinking about sandbagging everything, and the first thing they thought about was satellite TV. And they hooked up the TV, and sure enough, that night, within maybe 10 minutes, we were watching the Arab TV that they have on for that area. And they said the other choice was British TV, but we ended up watching TV for several nights in a row. And at one point in time, I just completely forgot that I was sitting with a group of Iraqis who were just all enjoying ourselves and just laughing at the movie and just having a good time.
Nice, just hanging out with the guys.
Yep.
Lynn?
Yeah, I want to give a thoughtful response because my tour, I had 3 tours that spanned across odd changes in the mission set. So my first tour, of course, we didn't really have, we just thought everything was, as David had said, everything was just constant fighting and war on the ground. And we flew straight from Fort Bragg in a C-5 to land near Baghdad. And, of course, it was the middle of the night, it was dark. The plane does its combat landing, and so we had no idea. I'll have to admit to you, I had no idea what was going to happen when we hit the ground. So anyway, from there, of course, we received our tours, and you take on a military mindset. I want to kind of give a visual to people who are listening what the streets of Baghdad are like. They're very, at least in 2004 and 2007, and I believe somewhat still today, it's very, it's very dirty. People do not have heat in their homes. They still lack electricity. So there's no refrigeration or very little of it. What lights they do have, they have either run by generators or when the power does come on, of course, and they use that. But it's very dirty, and there were many times that we rode through sewage that went to the top of the wheels of the Humvees for long periods of time. It wasn't like it was fixed quickly. So I think the transition on one side of the spectrum was we were there to first start to help the people get back on their feet, sort of stabilize the population. And then in 2007, of course, it turned towards security and shifting towards helping the government get up and running to have some sort of a consistent policy bit coming out of Baghdad towards the local Iraqi population, and then of course what we were going to do with the insurgency. And then my last tour again was trying to help the people bring back hope to the population and trying to develop the economy, which was lacking. So as I walk through those stages, I want people to understand the living conditions are still not any better. So think of the dirt. When you walk, there's dust. In the winter or when it rains, the dust and the dirt turn to gumbo, so it sticks to everything, your shoes, your combat boots, I mean everything. So it's quite a drastic change between summer and winter. The people are cold. There's no heat. There's no windows on most of the houses. The houses are made from clay brick. And so how did my perceptions change? Well, going from helping the local population in 2004 and 5 and in 7, again, I believe I had no idea what the Iraqi people were like. We weren't really given much information, because everything that we read was everything that was under Saddam Hussein. And so you pictured a population that came back from 3 or 4 times, back from shock and people were scared to vestiges of hope, and then they were shocked and scared again, and they came back to vestiges of hope. So how does it change? Their people are really strong. I mean, the Iraqi people are really strong people. And with every year that goes by, I think that my perception of their ability to come out of this on the leading edge is quite positive.
I have something to add, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Similar to how she was comparing her different tours, mine were over different spans, but also different areas. The PIC, which stands for Provincial Iraqi Control, happened in Anbar while I was there. So we transferred from basically doing missions unilaterally, which was by ourselves, to doing missions with them, teaching them how to do it to the point where they could do it. So I went after COIN, which is counterinsurgency, was implemented. So I didn't see I didn't see Iraq before counterinsurgency. I saw it after, and to me it worked. And one big difference between my first and my second tour was the fact that the Iraqis had taken over. So in the first one, we were leading patrols with them behind us, and then they were leading patrols with us behind them. And then my second tour, we needed their permission to do stuff, unless if it was, say, counter indirect fire. And then secondly, something that Lynn said reminded me about the sewage. It was the same in Fallujah. So imagine you're walking down the sidewalk in some United States city, and there's a sidewalk on each side of the road, but the road itself is just caked with sewage. So you have to walk on the sidewalk to avoid the sewage, and the sewage is like the height of the sidewalk. So if the sidewalk is tall, you know, the sewage is like 6 inches high. But about perceptions, something that I guess maybe people can relate to is the first mission I did in Fallujah. It reminded me of pictures I'd seen in World War II of bombed out Berlin. So that's what the place looked like.
Yeah, all of you are speaking about many things, like about the poverty. I think the estimates are around 25% of Iraqis live under the poverty line. So even though it's a country that has tremendous oil wealth, there's still a large segment of the population that is living below poverty, as well as Iraqis that are displaced.
Right, and a thing that really attracted me to EPIC is, you know, helping the youth. And every single mission, I was surrounded by kids who would come running out of the house and saying, Mr. Toba Toba, which means like ball, give me ball, or chocolate, you know, something like this. And I was just amazed at how small these houses were and how many kids came running out. And then you're like, okay, where are the parents? You know, like the uncle or the dad was killed in the Iran-Iraq war. Then you have the older brother was killed. Maybe he fought us, or maybe he was in the Iraqi police and he fought with us. So the amount of men who are caring for children and the quantity of orphans / kids who only have one parent, well, the quantity of men is low who are caring, and the quantity of kids is very high, which places a giant burden on the women.
Yeah, the thing about the women, though, too, I want to make note is that before Saddam Hussein, they had an enormous amount of freedom. If you look at pictures of Iraq before Saddam Hussein, it was almost like the Leave It to Beaver series, right? People were out in the parks picnicking. They wore the same clothes as we did. They had, you know, the same vehicles. And then the women, you know, were oppressed. The men were obviously everybody was living in fear. And then when we freed Iraq in 2003 and over 2004, you have to look at the visual signs. The women didn't have to wear headscarves, right? They were free not to walk around without headscarves, and the children were able to move around more freely. In 2007, when I returned, I noticed that the women were forced to cover up. They had to wear headscarves. They were wearing long skirts or pants, but it was clearly a visual change. So you could see that the fear had returned. I'm not sure, you know, in 2010 it was the same way, and now I see pictures of people that we're working with there. It has stayed that way. So there still is an amount of oppression that didn't exist prior to Saddam Hussein, and that they had a small amount of freedom which they tasted. And I think it's really important that we continue to work with the children and the women, because they are the major vestiges of change on the ground. And if you want to see change come, that's where it's going to come from. We need to invest in the future, specifically the children.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And there are, of course, some areas of Iraq, some of the cities that are more cosmopolitan, where there's a little bit more openness, but certainly in areas where you have certain militias in control, religious authorities exerting their authority, it really has kind of turned the clocks back in many ways.
Well, the government's allowing it. I mean, we need to be honest about that too. Up in the Kurdish area, of course, people are free to wear whatever they like within reason, you know, conservative, but they don't have to cover up. And they're free to engage in business and commerce, and the education programs up there are quite extensive. They have a lot of tourism, And I've been there several times as a private citizen, versus from Kirkuk south. It's quite different.
Yeah. So my final question for everybody, and this of course can lead to other more of a conversation, is starting with you, David. As an Iraq War veteran looking back, what legacy would you like to leave behind in Iraq?
The legacy that I would like is that the blood and treasure that we spent there not be wasted. And then the way that it won't be wasted is for Iraq to be successful. Successful both economically and democratically. If we look at Germany and Korea, we fought against them in World War II and the Korean War, both those countries are part of the OECD now, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. World War II vets can look back at Japan too, Japan. World War II vets can look at either Japan or Germany and say, hey, I helped to create a country which is among the most economically powerful and among the most democratically free countries in the world. And then same with the Korean War vets. Right now, we can't really say that too much. So I hope that all the money we spent and all the lives that we lost and all the many more lives that were lost on their behalf will not have been for waste.
Christopher?
I mean, I'm right there with David. I had Iraqi friends, I had American friends. I lost a lot more Iraqi friends than I did American friends. And to give an idea, we had 2 VBIDs hit our control point between our 2 camps that straddled the main MSR, and they killed like over 70 people between the 2. I mean, that's just counting the Iraqis. That's not that serve with us, not the civilians. I mean, you couldn't really tell how many. But I mean, I think Iraq is definitely owed a prosperous time, a peaceful time, a time of stability, and just a time just to move past everything that's been happening for like the last decade plus. And I think the major thing that's moving forward, like with what David was saying, is if you want to say why Iraq matters or why we should care about Iraq, then we should look at Germany after World War I, where they basically had no support, nobody backing them up, and they were just surrounded by hostile entities, and they just were really going at them, and that democracy just deteriorated. You have the same thing that happened in Russia in '91 when they went post-communist. Nobody really tried to help them out, and they were basically isolated, and we wonder why they're slipping back into their communist kind of mentality of just the government is right and just do what we tell you. And certainly there's been several people and critics over the past couple of weeks that have noted that Iraq is dangerously going towards a totalitarian kind of mindset with criticisms of just how Prime Minister Maliki is running things in Iraq and the conditions that Obama gave Maliki this past Friday, where he said basically you need to execute good governance, you need to pass an election law, and you need to make it more inclusive for continued support. So I think for both entities, we need to start just moving forward and working and cooperating, and it doesn't necessarily have to be our failure in Iraq. I think that's still to be determined. And granted, the fight is harder now because we're no longer there with boots on the ground, but it's definitely not a failure. It's a ways away from being a failure.
Yeah, there's still opportunities to make a difference. Lynn, what legacy do you hope we'll leave behind in Iraq?
No, I think that was a very thoughtful follow-up. I have to agree with both David and Chris. I also would like to see a unified Iraq where the separation of the Sunni, Shia, Christian, and other faiths come back together like they were in the past, and that they work together to help their country. And I think we do owe it to them. The way we left was quite stark, and I think that we do owe it to them to continue to help them.
So the only other thing I just want to ask really quickly, each of you are continuing your service in many different ways. Can you just briefly talk about what you're doing now that connects with helping Iraqis, whether they're refugees being resettled or helping through charitable work?
Right now, as I said earlier, well, in the summer I was an intern at Epic, so I was working with Epic in order to help implement plans and projects in Iraq to help specifically the youth. Currently, because I'm in California and not in Washington D.C., it's kind of hard to intern at Epic. So I was able to get an internship at the IRC, which is the International Rescue Committee, and currently assisting in helping many Iraqis resettle in the United States, Iraqi refugees and SIVs.
Christopher?
As I said earlier, I'm actually here completing a international nonprofit management graduate certificate through JMU. I actually found Epic through their current campaign on IraqMatters.com through Thunderclap, actually, and I just happened to be looking at Thunderbird, and I thought this was exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to have some kind of catharsis and have some kind of positive impact on Iraq and Iraqis, even if it is just a support role back in the United States.
And Lynn?
Yeah, I still have many Iraqi friends, as many of us do, and I wanted to continue to help after I left. One thing that I enjoy doing is private sector economic development, and so I've been over working on my own with individuals there to expand that. I've worked with some of the nuns and helping to set up some private sector clinics that serve everyone, and we're going to continue with that. Several medical missions that we work to provide pharmaceutical supplies and sort of a Doctors Without Borders effort. And then also I'm helping with the Iraqi Children Foundation to work with street children and orphans in Iraq.
That's the sponsor Iraqi Children Foundation with Jonathan and with Cindy.
We just changed the name. We dropped the word sponsor, but it's the Iraqi Children's Foundation with Jonathan. Yeah, great group. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to a couple folks. Jonathan Webb, who is also with the Iraqi Children's Foundation. He wasn't able to join us, but he's been amazing and doing great work with that organization. And then also Rick Burns with the Karada Project, another Iraq War veteran. So one of the things that is such an honor with this work and with EPIC's mission is connecting with so many Americans and Iraqis that are continuing to try to make a difference on the ground there. So thank you, all of you, for your service and for your continued sense of mission and everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you, Eric.